Well, hello quilty friends, and welcome back to my sewing loft. And today I'm going to do a tutorial for the snow star. Here's the snow stars right here. Okay, I'll go through and show you the ones that I have sewn so far. But it is for the Let's Make a Snowman Sew Along. You can see that here's the invitation and they're bordered around there. And this is what the quilt looks like for the sew along, and the stars border around it. They're 9-inch blocks, and I call them snow stars. They are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you know, all the way around like this. There's 22 of them, and they're numbered like that in the sew along guide. Okay, so the sew along guide, I'll leave you a link here in the description. This tells you all, well, let me open it. This gives you all of the fabric. This is like all of my sew along guides. Gives you each piece of fabric that goes in the quilt, and then the cutting for it and all of that. You know, same with the Sew Simple shapes, because in the quilt, this is pieced, the tree is pieced. There's a few of the blocks in here that are pieced. The snowman body parts are pieced and then appliqued, but the rest inside of the quilt is all applique from the Sew Simple shape. Super easy applique. It's a lot like my How to Build a Scarecrow, and this is Let's Make a Snowman. And so it is starting at the end of this month on Monday, August 26th, and it will be on my blog, although I always do week 1 here on my YouTube channel. So I have a blog that I do all of the tutorials on, but this is not my blog. I know a lot of people are saying I can't find the instructions like you said that they would be here. This is my YouTube channel, and the blog is completely separate. It's called Be in My Bonnet, and I always leave a link to that, and they're not the same thing. They're 2 different places. And so I wanted to do this tutorial here, and just in case, you know, you may want to make some of these blocks here for your quilt ahead of time. And if you're not making the quilt, I think it would make you a super cute quilt on its own, these blocks, or a table runner or whatever. So I just thought I would do the piece block as a tutorial. And so here's the snow star block 1, 2, 3. I think I have them in order, and you know, it really doesn't matter, but they're in order that they go in the quilt. But if you are not making the quilt and just doing a quilt, table runner, pillow, whatever, obviously you can put them in order, any order that you'd like. Now I'm using my new fabric collection that's just hitting the quilt shops right now, and it's called Hometown Holiday, and I'm really loving how all of these blocks are going together, and you know, with the fabric. I'm having a good time playing with the fabric. And so, well, let me talk about, let's bring this over here. So they're 9.5. Let's just do this right now, and then I won't do it with the block that I show you how to do. So this is my 9.5-inch trim it ruler. And so that's when I just lay it on here after I've sewn it and just kind of look at all the lines, you know, square everything up if I need to. That's at the very end. But as I'm going along, it just reminded me to tell you that, because this is what I've got done so far. I did 3 of the segments, and then I'm going to do the 4th segment to show you how to do that, just to speed up time so you don't have to watch me do all of the, you know, entire corners of the block. But these, at this point, measure 4.5 inches unfinished, and so this is where I use the trim it ruler. So after I've finished this segment, I like to put my trim it ruler on here, line everything up with the lines, make sure that I'm not going to cut off any points with the 1/4-inch seam. This aqua part is the 1/4-inch seam, and I line that up and then trim off if I need to. Now sometimes I have a little area that's too small to trim off, meaning it's shorter. Let me see if I can grab my mat so you can see it better. And I know I've shown you this before, but it's, you know, it's worth repeating, I think. So when I laid this on here, I noticed, I don't know if you can see that, sis, but see, it kind of goes down underneath that aqua where it's too short right there. you know, there's definitely enough room to go into the seam allowance, but it's not 1/4 of an inch, and so that's why I stick a pin there. And I know that tells me down on this corner that this is correct. All of these lines are correct, but this is a little bit short. And so then I know how to kind of make up for that when I go to sew the block together. Okay, so that's why that pin is there. And so that's how I use, you know, that's just one of the ways that I use my trim it rulers to just kind of help me as I go along. Okay, I wanted to tell you that I am using, I have 10 background fabrics in this collection, and so I have 8 blocks done so far, and they all have a different background in them. Some are used several times. Most are used at least twice, 3 times. Some are used more. And then, but I use this print right here in common in every one of the blocks. Okay, right here in all of the blocks, and then just a different background on the outside corners. And if you have sewn my things before, you know that I like to use several backgrounds. I think it adds a lot of interest and a lot of texture and detail and excitement in a quilt. Okay, so that's what that is. So let's see. Another thing is I do not mark my half square triangles because I follow the center line on my Seam So Easy guide. I just line up that center line with the needle and find, you know, straight lines along my machine using this graph. That's why I designed this graph, so that you can make sure it's square and straight on your machine. As soon as this center line is lined up with the needle, then you just need to make sure that it's going straight this way and this way, because if you just line it up with the needle, I mean, it could be going crooked this way a little bit. So you need to make sure it's square both ways. But I do like to mark just to show you, you know, so that you can see which direction I'm sewing and what it looks like as far as filming. When you do mark, if you do mark, you can just use, you know, a ruler and just mark from point to point, okay? And a mechanical pencil. Okay, so there's that. All right, I think I've told you everything, the information as far as that information, and then we can start sewing. Let me put that up here. Oh, this is my new book stand, and this is going to be out in January, and it's in the color denim. So I'm excited. I've got the prototype here, and I'm excited to be using it. And so I think I'm going to put this block here just because I always like a visual of what I'm doing. I'm going to put my readers on. I usually need my readers to kind of see what I'm sewing. And so let's start with this corner. So what I do first is I just sew these 2 squares together, one background and one of the prints. And I just use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. My 1/4 inch on the Seam So Easy is right here. I just follow that along, and I'm just using little scraps of fabric in between. Normally I'm sewing other quilt block segments in between as I'm chain piecing, but because of filming, I like to, you know, just use scraps of fabric so that you can see exactly what I'm doing and you don't have to wait for me to be doing another bonus quilt in between. And so I press my seams open to make my blocks accurate. Usually roll them, press, and then use a clapper to absorb that heat, and because of the weight of it, it makes it flat as well. And then the next thing I'm going to do, well, I guess you can see from that. I was just going to kind of show you what it looks like. So just if you're doing 4 at the same time like I normally do, then I would have all 4 of these stacked up like this and all 4 of these stacked up like this. So I have my color down here and my background up there, and then I'm simply going to take these 2 and sew them together. I like to sew squares and rectangles together when possible, and then do the easy corner triangles after. I mean, obviously I could have made a flying goose, and a half square triangle and then sewn them together, but that adds a lot of bulk and is easier to not be accurate. If that, I don't know if that's an easy way to explain it, but I have just found, you know, over the years of quilting that I like to do my easy corner triangles or flip corner triangles, whatever you want to call them, afterwards, because look how nice and flat this block is. I don't have all of those bulk in the seams, you know, as I would if this was a half square triangle. I would have this bulk, I would have the flying geese point here, I would have, and so I'm just going to add it afterwards on top, and it's much less bulky. I don't know if that's proper English, but I hope you know what I'm talking about. Less bulky, much less bulky. And so once it's become nice and flat, and that should measure 4.5 inches square, unfinished right now. And so here is my background square, and then I will take this music piece right here, the Away in a Manger, and I will lay it right here. So I want it all lined up here. I don't want to be able to see that pink through there. I want to see the white. This is the wrong side. And if you're you've marked your squares like I did this one from point to point, you just simply sew on the line. If you are not marking and using the Seam So Easy guide, I just follow the center line. I just start in a corner right there, and I simply just start the center line, making sure these are all lined up. And then I'm just automatically following that line, okay? And so it saves me a lot of time in marking, but I know that some of you really like to mark just to, you know, just because that's what you're used to, and it makes you, you know, helps you to be more accurate. And so I just think that you need to do whatever you're the most comfortable with, and that, you know, helps you to enjoy the process, because that's what's most important, right? Okay, so I just trimmed that easy corner triangle off by an approximate 1/4 inch. It doesn't have to be exact. You could use your little mat and rotary cutter if you wanted to. I just like to use my scissors. And especially where these seams come together, I press with my roller there, and use a good hot iron. I always leave a link about vintage irons, why I use them, how I find them, where I get them, how to shop for them, you know, what to know, how to know what to do. So please read the description of this video so that you will know, you know, how to use those if you're interested, and how to find them. Okay, so now you've got your little segment that looks like this, and we're going to be adding easy corner triangles on these two, and that will match the background pieces. And again, I went ahead and marked those just so that you could see the direction that I'm sewing when I lay here. And you can do this side first and then go ahead and sew the other side, because they will not overlap each other. And then you can press them both at the same time. I like to keep a little vintage bowl here. It's a little came with a little vintage kitchen set to keep my little scraps of fabric in, left over from trimmings. That's what I make out of my trimmings that I cut off of my easy corner triangles. I'll cut a little square if they're too small to use in a quilt or something, and use them in between my sewing when I'm filming. Okay, so now you've got the segment that looks like this. I always, before I trim or anything, I try to remember to set my seams, and that helps, keeps your blocks flat too, because you're pressing your bobbin thread with your top thread and interlocking them even more. And then I just go ahead and trim those. And then these will open up. So I like that how I can control the seams on the back side. Okay, how do I explain this? Because I've added these easier corner triangles after and not made, you know, half square triangles or flying geese. All of those seams, if I had done it before, would be underneath these other seams. And even though it's the same amount of layers of fabric, because they're on top, I can control it more. I can make sure they're open all the way by using that, the roller, pressing, trying not to iron, but pressing with a good hot iron, pressing those open. The reason I don't want to iron back and forth is because I don't want to distort my block or my segment. So I just make sure it gets really good and hot, and then I will lay the clapper on there. And sometimes I'll add a couple more just for weight. And then I'm going to come over and lay out the rest of this block, which is the center part here. But before I'm going to do that, I might as well sew these, all of these, to the ends of these 3.5 by 1.5 inch strip. Now all of the measurements are in the sew along guide, but these are, I've started out with all 2.5 inch squares, and this rectangle is a 2.5 by 4.5 cutting. And then these are 1.5 inch squares that I am sewing onto the end of a 1.5 by 3.5 inch rectangle or strip. When you're using a directional fabric, like this is a plaid, but it is kind of directional because, you know, it's outlined with white this way and not outlined with white this way. You can just make sure they all go the same direction if you'd like to, across this way. And then when they're in the block, they will all be kind of going out of the block, like from the center out. Or you could turn 2 of them going the other way and 2 of them going up and down and 2 of them going sideways, so that when you laid it out, they would all either be going up and down the stripes or going this way. Hope that made sense, but I'm not too particular with that. I just made these all go the same way, and I know because I do that, that when I lay that out in the block, that it will be symmetrical no matter what. You know, the two across from each other will always be, you know, look the same. Okay, so that segment right there is nice and flat. We're going to put that over here for a second, and I'm going to set these seams, and then while these are cooling, I'll lay out the block. And when I'm pressing something like this, I usually just line it up this way, open it. Helps me to keep track of my pieces, make sure that I got them all 4 of them. I'll roll it, just using some pressure, making sure that I'm opening those seams all the way, which is what keeps your blocks flat. Press it, and then I'm going to pick a clapper that I haven't used previously so that it's nice and cool. Okay, these are the Riley Blake Quilters clappers. I'll just keep that on there, maybe stack another one up here. And then I use all different sizes of my design boards to just for different segments at different times. But because this is a 10-inch finished one and the block is 9.5, I need to use a larger one so that I can lay out all my pieces and see them. So I'm just going to lay them out, turning whichever way they need to be turned. Okay, I'll save that for when the block's finished and put it on there. And so it really helps me to lay out my blocks on a design board so that I know that everything is turned correctly and I'm not going to make a mistake. And I know that because this pin is here, when I go to sew this together, I can make an adjustment on that. And I'll show you what I mean when I go to sew them together. Okay, so now these little squares go on the outside, right here on the ends. And now I'm just going to sew it into a row like this. So here we go this way. I'm gonna do it so that my strip is underneath, because I want to make sure that I'm not gonna run over that point right there. I just like to, if I have a choice, to see it upright, and that just helps me to see and make sure. Now you can pin if you'd like to at this point. I'm usually not a pinner on shorter segments like this. I always pin with borders and, you know, things like that when I need to, but I'll show you when I do use a pin and how I use it. So I'm going to do the same thing with this, and remember that this is a little bit short. So I'm going to start right here, sewing this, and as you can see, as I'm coming down, that's going to be a little bit short, and I know that, and that's okay. I know that's supposed to be that way, because that's how I sewed the block, and without having to redo the block, as long as it's under 1/4 of an inch and it will go in your seam allowance, it's fine. As long as you're aware of it, then you can kind of make those adjustments when you're sewing. Okay, then I'm going to cut these apart, bring them over here, set the seams, open it up, roll it, especially right here where those seams intersect. Now this one, I'm going to set the seam, and I do this a lot too. I know I've shown you this before, but a lot of times I'll stack my clappers and just press it right on top of there to save me room on my little ironing space here. Now I'm going to set this seam. I'm going to leave that pin in there because I know that it's still this side that's a little short. And so, you know, obviously I'm not glad that that's a little short, but I was kind of glad that that happened with one of the segments as I was measuring them, because I wanted to be able to show you how I adjust that and take care of that, because that's just a common thing in sewing quilt block segments together. You try to, you know, there's no such thing as perfection. You try for it, but you just don't. And as long as you know what you have to adjust and what's measuring right and what's measuring short, or whatever you want to call it, which is why I use my trim rulers. They really help me for that. Then you can make adjustments, you know, as needed as you go along. Okay, so this one, because it's just a flat seam, I think is, you know, dry. I shouldn't say dry, cooled faster. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish that row real quick, allowing those other segments to stay under the clapper for just a minute longer. Squish those seams together, open it up, and I'm going to turn, well, I use the other side of that one too. I'm going to turn this one over because it's cooled, and then I've got these segments right here. Put them back here, line them up, always make sure, okay, yeah, everything's turned the direction it's supposed to be turned, so I don't make a mistake. If I make a mistake, I can always use the seam ripper, but I want to try to do the best I can without making mistakes in the first place. But there is usually always a way to fix them. Okay, so because I know this is, so here's what this looks like. This is longer because this is a shorter piece, but this is correct. Okay, so now I should be able to line those up. That measures 4.5 inches, just like this measures 4.5 inches. So that will also help when I'm going to sew the segment together. I'll show you what I mean. Sometimes it's just hard to explain. It's just much easier to just show you when I get to that point. I like to use scraps of fabric in between. Some of you have asked me that. Why do you use scraps of fabric in between if you're not making bonus quilt, or why don't you just cut your tails? It uses a lot more thread, and I just think it saves time, and it's just neater. And That's just, I like to have a little tidy workspace. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing. Open this up. And make sure, I like to feel with my finger there that that's open all the way without like a little pleat or anything in it, so that I can roll it. Feel that's open. You can put this on an angle too for the corner to really get that on those intersections right there. My seam roller is flat because that really helps to keep it straight and not distorted. Sometimes having a curve in there could do that. Okay, so I'm just going to let that cool for just a minute, and let me I'll just talk to you a little bit more about the sew along. So you just go to my blog every Monday and Friday, and here's the schedule right here. Okay, and I always leave a link to my blog here in my YouTube channel. My channel and my blog work together kind of like as partners. And so I'm back and forth leaving links on both my blog to my YouTube channel, like for the Be Prepared post that I'll be doing on Monday, which will be, you know, public at the same time that I do this post on my channel. I always have a link right to my channel saying, here's the tutorial on how to make these blocks. And then in turn here, because I'm filming here on my YouTube channel, I'll say, here's a link to my blog to go and look at more detailed instructions to talk about, you know, the quilt, what you might need, where you could get a kit, you know, all those kind of things. If you haven't got your kit yet, just do a quick Google search of Let's Make a Snowman Sew Along kit, and you'll find many quilt shops who have the quilt ready and in stock and ready, you know, and be happy to ship to you. And I have all of the details right there on my blog, exactly how the sew along works, step by step, every week. Okay, let's see how these segments look. They look good. Okay, I'm gonna do this one first with the pin in it so I can explain. So I know that I need this to go on there. And this is short. This is correct, but it's kind of like goes on a slight angle where it goes too short. So I am going to start with the strip underneath, turn it around after I've lined them up correctly, so that I can see the short piece, so that I can make up for that. Meaning, see down here at the end, I'm gonna grab a pin, and just stick that pin there so I know that's lined up. But what I'm really concerned about before I even get to this point that's short is I want this seam right here, this one right here, to match up there. So that's when I use my double pins. So let me grab one out of this container. These containers I designed years ago for all my little pretty pins, this little mason jar. And I've designed a new container that's super cute, and it's shaped like a little bee. And my new pins are going in that. So I've got a new set of, all new sets of pretty pins and new sets of double pins coming. So when I go to pin, I line up these two seams right here. They're open, so it's really easy to see exactly where they line up. And I like to use the double pins because I want to pin, and I just stick it in there. I don't do this like I just did that and do a little shovel. You know, I don't need to do that. I just stick it in there to line those up, one on one side of the seam and one on the other. And then when I sew there, that is not gonna shift at all. There's just no way it can shift. Now I can sew over those if I want to, or I can remove it right when I get there, whichever, but I just go really slow if I'm gonna sew over it. And then I can remove it right there and then line up the next one. So I'm gonna line up this next open seam with this open seam, but remember this is short here. So I'm just gonna line it up there knowing that that's how it goes. I'm not going to pull this fabric over here. I can put that back now. I'm not going to pull this fabric over here because I know that that is short. So see, that's kind of where it got distorted right there. Okay, so I'm just going to run right over that, and it's going to be like it never happened, like that was never short, because it fits within the size of that seam allowance. And my seam allowance is going to be where it's short, and that's not going to matter. Then I can go ahead and take that pin out, because I'm usually more comfortable just holding it with my fingers on the corners, stretching and manipulating however I need to make that end up correctly. And then I can go ahead and take out my double pins. Okay, then I'm going to set this seam. And see what I mean when I open this seam where that's short, that's never going to show at the front. That lined up perfectly, and my block will end up being accurate. Okay, we've got one more seam to do. Also, I wanted to tell y'all thank you so much for your kind comments about my sewing room tour, my new sewing loft. Now I can sew at call it my sewing loft, because now you know what I'm talking about if you saw my tour and what it looks like up here. And also wanted to thank Cassidy, my daughter, here for filming me today as I'm doing these blocks. When I do my crochet videos, I've just been filming myself because it's a top down and I can do that, but as I'm sewing on the sewing machine, I can't really film myself and show you at the same time. I don't know, maybe I can figure how to do that sometime, but for right now, I really like how Cassidy shows close up and far away when she needs to and things like that, so I really appreciate that. Okay, I normally would let that be under there a little bit longer, but I wanted to go ahead and add that to there, and then because it's going to be pressed under there again as well. So once again, I'm going to start at the beginning here. Then I'm going to grab my double pin. I'm going to sew a little bit more so I can get to that surface. Line those up and just barely poke it in so that I know it's not going to shift. Continue sewing slowly. I made these pins thin enough so that you can sew over them. Once I'm past that pin, I'm going to take it and stick it in there on both sides of the seam, the open seam, and do the same thing. Sometimes I have hit the pin once in a while with the needle, but not very often. I think that I can only remember once of actually hitting it, breaking my needle, which was not a big deal. I just changed the needle. But most of the time, I take it out right when it gets to there, or sew over it, it doesn't matter. Okay, so there's the last seam for that one, for Snow Star Block number 9. See how that center is lining up because of using those double pins. And I just shift it and make it work at the end and in the middle, and you know, things like that. That's what I love about using 100% cotton. It has that give to it. It has a memory, and you can manipulate it. You don't just have to run your segments through the machine and just hope they line up. You can actually be the boss of your own quilt, be the boss of your own quilt block, and make sure that it lines up however you need to with these little, you know, tips and tricks along the way. I think I'll use a long one for that long seam. And then, since that has to be under the clapper anyway, I'll just do that, set that. Okay, so let me go back to this while that is cooling. I wanted to show you a few other pages. So in the front, it shows you all of the notions and everything like that. I told you all about the fabric. So that's where the fabric cutting ends. This is where the So Simple Shapes, I forgot to bring a set of So Simple Shapes in here to show them to you, but I easily could have done that. But if you've done any of my other quilts, you know that they're applique shapes. This tells you how many are used in the quilt and what size to cut the interfacing. I use sewing interfacing. There's an embroidery pattern. There's only one little piece of embroidery, and that's on the cardinal block. So there's that, and then it's going to detail every block. So even if you're not doing the quilt, this is a free PDF download. If you're not doing this particular quilt, you can still go in and download it. I'll leave a link, and this shows you all of the blocks, the fabrics, and the cutting for them, and just the different combinations there. Okay, I believe there's 22 blocks, if I remember right. I mean, I did draw this a long time ago, yes. And then we go into the applique blocks, okay? And so even though here's the sew along guide, I still will be going through on my blog and doing a tutorial on my blog for each of these applique blocks, except for week 1. I will do it here on my channel, and I'll show you week 1 in a minute, but I'm just want to leaf through this and kind of show you. This is what I was talking about, where the snowman parts, like the head and the middle part and the body, are pieced, and then you use a So Simple Shape to turn it into the oval. And then it shows you all the different sections of the blocks when you sew them together after you've trimmed them up, and then how the quilt goes together. Gives you all of that instructions there, and that's what it looks like. It's 75 by 87 is the finished size, and then I always have notes at the end. And so this is where we'll be starting with week 1, the snowman hat, and a few other blocks too. We're doing the top hat, the branches, the poinsettia, and the snowman word blocks. So I'll be showing all of that, how to do that step by step on my blog, so you have record of that there, and showing you how to do the hat here, maybe one of the letters or something like that here on my channel on the Monday that it starts. Okay, so that hopefully is all the information that you need about where to go for the sew along. And I will have everything on my blog every Monday and Friday once the sew along starts. Okay, so there we go. There's the 9-inch Snow Star block. Right now it measures 9.5 inches unfinished, and then it will measure 9 inches when it goes into your quilt. And I love this block. I think it's fun. I think it's super easy by doing the squares together and then the rectangle and then doing the easy corner triangles. It's super fast, and I can make a block in, sometimes I time myself, sometimes I don't, but I can make one of these blocks in about 30 minutes. So I think that's pretty quick, and I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel, and I will chat with you later.